Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so today we're going to talk about not playing any wrong notes, specifically in jazz improvisation. Now, just with reading music, you just got to practice and work that out, man. Okay, you ever hear a great jazz musician solo and you're just like, man, that person isn't playing any wrong notes? Well, actually they are, but we need to define what a wrong note is. And in general, we refer to a wrong note as some note that's just outside of the chord. You know what I'm saying? So let's see if we can hear the wrong note on this concert C. We're going to focus in major, Ionian mode, C major concert. Okay. So I took this note that was supposed to be, and I raised it by a half step. All right, let's extend that concept. Now it's starting to sound like something. Where it was a wrong note before, now I have assigned it a very specific function. Let's try it a little faster and with a little more of a jazz articulation and emphasis. Now, if I arpeggiate that, I get. Now it's starting to sound like something. So I was able to take this note that had some undefined dissonance that didn't serve a proper function, and I assigned it a function. If we look at our C major scale, we can think about all the notes of the chromatic scale and how they relate to the C major scale. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different because in the key of C major, we have the dominant 7 chord, G7, which precedes it. This is where we can throw in all of our wrong notes to make them make sense. Now, I don't even have to voice the G7 chord. I can just think about C major and how it relates to the 5 chord. So that wrong note, which in the key of C would be the flat 9, that D flat, that is a sharp 11 or a flat 5 over a G7. Let's take the time to go over every note in the chromatic scale and how it relates to a G7 chord. As you can see here, ladies and gentlemen, we have our G dominant 7 scale. We have our G that serves as the root, and we have our A flat. This is going to be our first altered or wrong note. That is a flat 9. That is generally your diminished reinforcer there. That A flat / G sharp also makes for an excellent passing tone in the key of C relative to the C chord. Then we have our A, that is our 9th, nice reinforcement of the dominant 7 sound. Then we have our B flat, that is the sharp 9. Almost always when you have something funk oriented, funky, you got a sharp 9 over that dominant chord there. Then we have our B, making this a major, reinforcing the dominant. We have our C natural, that is the perfect 4th. I'm going to get to that one a little bit later. Then we have our C sharp, which is the sharp 11, a nice color tone. Helps you in minor keys and helps you to reinforce the altered chord sound. We have our D natural. The D natural is most often left out on dominant 7 chords. This is a note you can just leave out. That gives you the option of being able to color the 5th. Have our E flat, flat 13, that's a nice color tone. E natural, this is one of our diatonic extensions that we can use to reinforce the dominant 7 sound. And then we have our flat 7, mandatory in making this a dominant 7. I have highlighted an F sharp and below that the sharp 11. That is highlighted. I'm going to get to that later in this video. All right, let's move on. Okay, so remember, I don't have to voice the G7 chord at all. I can do all of this just over the C major chord. Every single note has some type of dissonance associated with it, even if it's in the chord. Okay. Now let's talk about the C major scale. There's one note in particular that's going to cause you some problems, and that is the F natural. Again, I'm doing this in concert. So that F natural is a suspension. So if you have a C major chord and you just start hitting that F a whole lot of times, it's like you're suspending the chord, but it's already been resolved. That's kind of like knowing what your Christmas presents are before you've opened them, you know? It ruins it, even though that note is in the scale. So when you go to play the notes diatonic to the key of C, you need to take special care when playing that note. Oftentimes you'll hear something like this. You'll hear that 4th resolve down to the 3rd. Okay? Another way around that is to just take that note out altogether by substituting the sharp 11. In jazz, this happens all the time. And I want to emphasize throughout this entire video, you often don't have to voice it in the chord when you're playing it on your instrument to imply it and give it function. That's what we're doing. We're taking any note that has any kind of dissonance and we're applying a very specific function. And in this case, that sharp 11, it's a color tone and it can be a passing tone. So you hear something like this. One of the most common things that people do whenever they hit certain notes, certain wrong notes, is they realize, hey, that's a note in a blues scale that works over this. So you'll hear something like this. Remember, I don't have to voice those altered notes in the chord. Whenever I think about playing any wrong notes, I'm just thinking that's an important note in a G7 chord. And then I can just resolve it and give this thing a lot more emphasis. I can make the line more colorful, more melodic, more harmonically interesting. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the most important part about this whole idea of not playing any wrong notes. We don't need to think about following individual chord changes. We need to be thinking about a much more global picture. You're following key centers, tonal centers, When you first started to learn jazz, one of the first scales that you learned was a blues scale. So when I was teaching kids, I would show them this blues scale and they would all do exactly the same thing once they got to the blue note, right? Because I'd play it first. Right? And then I'd play a chord and have them play it. And every single time, they'd get to that blue note and they would go. And I would look at them and I would go. They'd play it again. And I'd look at them and I'd go. Then I'd teach them, hey, that's a special note. It's the note that makes this thing work the way it does. But when you hit it, you got to get off of it. That is exactly what I've been teaching you throughout this entire thing, is how to assign that dissonant note function. You assign it that function, and now it's deliberate. Now it's not a wrong note. But we're not thinking about individual specific chord changes. Thinking about the global picture, the global timbre. So you think of, if you're in the key of C concert, you got your C blues scale that you can use, which is more dissonant, or you have your A blues scale, which is a little less dissonant. But every time you get to the most dissonant note, it already has a built-in function. That's what you're doing with every single one of those notes that I laid out that has that kind of dissonance to it. You just have to learn how to incorporate it in the same way that you learned how to incorporate the blues scale in that tension note. So all this stuff that I'm telling you is stuff that you've already been doing. We just need to extend the concept of the blues scale to other scales and to other notes. Okay. It works to a certain degree of efficiency when you have a song that is inherently very complex, like Giant Steps, for example. Number one, the song isn't just played fast, but the tonal centers are moving around very quickly. They move around in a very unconventional way, and the chord progression is offset in a bizarre way that really throws it into this different thing. When you do that, you wind up with this really, really pretty song. Giant Steps has this really unique kind of sound to it. But even still, if you start slow and work your way into it, you can start to hear how every dissonant or wrong note that you play starts to work itself out. A lot of guys cheat and just have the chorded instrument drop out and they just have the drums and bass, then they bring it back in and whatever. But at any rate, we're thinking about shifting tonal centers. Okay, so right before I finish, I'm going to play this one line in the key of C major over a C major 7 chord concert, and I'm going to play every note in the chromatic scale. It's so much more about linear progression as opposed to vertical progression. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you. But I do want to plug one of my upcoming videos that I have, which is Bad Teachers. You guys have been asking me about this for years, and it just dawned on me, man, I should really do a video really talking about that. So that's going to be coming up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you. See ya!